Well, Alex, now I'd like to switch gears to your new book. Again, that is Positive Communication for Leaders, Proven Strategies for Inspiring Unity and Effecting Change. And again, as I had mentioned, I read your entire book, and I really appreciate how you give practical yet research-based strategies for positive leadership. So, Alex, if you would, please allow me to walk through the chapters. And I'd like to ask that if you could just share a little bit with our listeners, and then we can leave it up to our listeners and provide them with the link to your book, and they can purchase the book to learn more. But I think the best way to share your work is if you could just take a minute as we walk through each one of the topics of each chapter, and just take a moment to explain further what that topic is about and what it means. But first, I want to share with our listeners what you wrote in the preface of your book. And again, this is with your colleague and co-author, Julian Miraval. And you wrote, quote, "We wrote this book to equip you and other people who are in positions of leadership and influence to create meaningful and influential relationships with your employees and have the skills to build a positive workplace culture." End quote. And I think you hit the nail on the head here with your book and with each one of these chapters and the way you broke it down. And again, what I really appreciate is just the excellent practical advice, but yet research-based strategies. I really do appreciate that, your work. So that being said, Alex, if you want to add anything before we dive in here, feel free. But your chapter 2 is Greet to Create Human Contact. What do you mean by that, and why is that so important?
Well, one of the things that we learned, and that my co-author Julian articulated in one of his earlier books, is that every culture in every part of the world has greeting rituals. They look different, but they all know what a good greeting is. And when people blow it off, screw it up, it will cause a lot of difficulty in the relationship. And so we said, let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about how, when you're first running into someone for the day or for the week, or if you haven't seen them in a while, how do we greet people, and how do we do that in a way that creates and invites a human connection? How can we do that in a way that moves closer, moves in to the other person, rather than the distant, I don't know, like a football Heisman, where you stick the arm out and you say, I'm busy, I gotta keep going. That creates a real bad impression. It creates a bad. And Julian and I talk about this in the book, that the greeting is a great symbol of what kind of relationship you're creating. Communication is not just about transferring information from one place to another. It's about creating a relationship. So the way you establish a connection and greet people is the first sign of the quality of relationship you want to create with others. And by the way, it's one of the first things we withdraw when you're having conflict with people in the workplace or at home. It's one of the first things you avoid. You don't want to greet them. You'll walk the other way in the building. You'll figure out a way to swerve around them so you don't have to, because greet and connect is, we realize the significance of it. So that's why it's so important to get that first step right. Greet them. How you doing? How's everything going? How was your weekend? Make some small talk. Open a channel of communication, and that leads to lots of other work and task related goals that you can move to from there.
What powerful advice there. And Alex, let me ask you this. I've actually often wondered about this and observed it. So I assume that the create and invite human connection includes email.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting to me, and obviously you as well, just studying leadership in general and in the broad sense, right? And one of the things, you see, especially at Nestell Associates and working with lots of executives and CEOs and so forth, you get an email and it's just one or two sentences, no hi, no thank you, no please, no none of that, right? But doesn't, especially internally amongst your internal stakeholders, does that apply? I mean, is that a tip and a pointer? So it's not just in person, face to face, but it seems that is a valuable idea and notion through other forms of communication as well, especially email.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one-on-one, it's in group meetings, and it's absolutely in emails. In fact, we cited some research from the research team, the New Zealand Language at Work study, I believe it's called. And they did an audit of emails, and they found that workplace cultures that had difficult, toxic atmospheres had no greetings and no sincere closings in their emails. They just said, the meeting is at 5:00. But
Is that right?
the
Yeah.
organizations that had great cultures, some of the best places to work, when they examined their emails, they would say, "I hope everybody had a good weekend. I'm so excited to get back to work. By the way, our meeting today is at 5.
Hmm.
Warmest regards, Alex Lyon." And
Yeah.
the question is, is the culture creating these warm greetings, or are the warm greetings helping to create the culture? And it's a little bit of both, but one thing is for certain: you have to, if you're already in a toxic culture, you have to break the cycle. You have
Yeah.
to try. And
Yeah.
this is a great intervention, a great inroad to change things, to begin to turn the corner and connect.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. I'm going to have to, because it is a topic I've often wondered about, but really never dug into. I'm going to have to grab that paper and share that out as well in our show notes. Sounds like a fascinating piece of research.
Yeah, we do cite it in the book to make it easier on you.
Good. Perfect. So, Alex, tell me more about your third chapter, Asked to Discover the Unknown. I mean, when it comes to positive communication, why does that matter?
Well, it's especially important for leaders. When we ask questions, especially questions of our peers and our followers, we are getting to know them. We're discovering things that we would not have known about them otherwise. And if you just think at an interpersonal level, now you're a podcaster, so you understand the value of asking questions. But most people in everyday life don't even realize they're supposed to ask questions to get a conversation going. If you've ever been part of a really boring conversation at a party or something, it's usually because everybody just keeps telling long, drawn out stories because they think they're there to entertain everybody. But really, the best conversations come from questions, back and forth, dialogue. And as a leader, you can begin asking more questions and drawing out the people around you, getting to know them. And as a leader, that helps you understand their needs more effectively. And then you can respond to those needs more effectively. And one of the research bits we cite in the book is that only 6% of all communication acts are questions, but 60% of conversation in the workplace is generated from those questions. So
Yeah.
asking questions, and better questions, is literally a leadership behavior.
Yeah. Though that's interesting statistics. All right, Alex. Well, let me ask you this one, and I think chapter 4 was one of my favorites because I do think this is seems to me to be an underemphasized, I guess, tool, and that is complement to affect people's sense of self.
Mm-hmm. And that's in the workplace. People normally think of that as positive feedback, a compliment that is specific, usually about something that the leader watched happen or heard about through the grapevine. Like, wow, I heard you did a wonderful presentation. Just wanted to say thank you for your preparation. That's a compliment. And that not only reinforces the kind of positive behavior we want, but it creates, again, the relationship. It shows people that the leader cares enough to follow up. And complimenting is something that we don't do. It feels like a risk, like, oh, I don't know, if I say they did a good job, does that somehow diminish my own stature if I
Yeah.
lift them
Yeah.
up? And so in the workplace, a lot of people will hold compliments back and they won't say what's on their mind. And that's a bit discouraging, but leaders' words carry extra weight. And when a leader pats you on the back in a sincere way, by the way, these all have to be sincere. These aren't calculated behaviors.
Authentic. Yeah.
They have to be
Yeah.
authentic.
Yeah.
Because people can usually tell the difference. If when you get a sincere compliment, some sincere, genuine, specific feedback from a leader, it can really change your whole outlook on working there. You
Mhm.
think, wow, people are noticing what I'm doing. They're valuing me. This feels great. So it's an underused leadership behavior, but one that we should all do. Most of the time, we just hear about mistakes we've made. We hear the negative feedback. We don't often enough hear the compliments.
Yeah, and Alex, I think your chapter 5 is also another underused leadership behavior, and that is to disclose to deepen relationships. How can disclosing information and ideas deepen relationships?
Disclosure is a powerful tool, but it's also the one that leaders struggle with the most because they're putting themselves out there a little bit, and that feels like a risk. It feels vulnerable. But when you're disclosing, you're telling people information about yourself that they would not otherwise know. One of the powerful moments happens, though, when a leader shares a little bit of their background, their struggle, what they've overcome to get there, or how they dealt with a similar situation in the past that you might be dealing with now. Those kinds of personalized moments of disclosure can really connect people and humanize the leader in a way that you're more relatable, and people want to work even harder for you. They think, wow, he just told me about himself, and that makes me feel like we have a real relationship. We're not just in roles here. And then they're going to step up for you. They're going to feel like, oh, he understands me, she understands me. And there's that beginning of the empathy process happening. And this is, by the way, the closest thing in my field. I've been saying lately that this is like a magic wand. Perhaps you've felt this, Jack. So someone tells you something about themselves, and then you feel a freedom to, or even an obligation to share something similar,
Yeah.
right? They tell you about their life, then you feel like, oh, I should tell them about my life.
Yeah.
That's like a magic wand, disclosure. And then the other half of the magic wand is reciprocity. So
Yeah.
that's a mutual exchange. And when we disclose in the workplace like this, it really does create a bond where you feel like you've exchanged gifts and your relationship has been solidified.
Yeah, absolutely, Alex. I agree. And I think that when you disclose and you're being authentic, as you'd mentioned, that just creates empathy, right? And I
Yeah.
think empathy is an important part of any relationship. And in fact, there's been multiple papers that have been written on leadership qualities, and I don't recall them off the top of my head, but I have several of them. And a couple of the top two, I guess, factors for leadership are the very topic in which you're an expert at, and that's communication. And then the other one, two-way effective communication, right?
Yeah.
And then the other one is empathy. Out of all the potential, leadership attributes and behaviors and all these other factors that create good leadership, empathy is one of them. And I think that that's just because we're all human. We meet and we collect in a certain workspace, perhaps, or under a certain umbrella or organization. But at the end of the day, we're all human. And to create that valuable relationship, it means being human. So that means complimenting each other and being genuine about it, and just disclosing information about yourself and not thinking that makes you weaker, because at the end of the day, those are ideas and things that create empathy within the relationship. And therefore it creates additional trust. Right.
Agreed.
Great ideas. Okay. Number 6, encourage to give support.
So the world, as Rocky says, ain't all sunshine and rainbows. And in fact, positive communication is not just about having a sunny attitude or being superficially peppy. It's about striving for positive outcomes more than anything else. And part of that means encouraging people, giving them support when they're struggling. And this is something that leaders could get better at as well. Again, continuing the conversation about empathy that we're having here. In the book, we say that the shortest road between a leader and a follower is empathy. It's what binds us. And one of the ways we can do this is when people are struggling, when they're in distress, when they're going through something professional that's difficult. A leader oftentimes has traveled the same road. They have been there, or they've helped other people get through it. And so it's one of those times where you can help with advice, you can help with more listening, you can help with some kind of concrete action to help them out. But it's important as a positive behavior to lend that support. If this were an interpersonal relationship, we call it social support, which is a powerful thing that people need when they're in health problems and difficulty. But as a leader, you can support them in the workplace this way as well. So it's really important when people get knocked down to help them get up.
Yeah, absolutely. Alex, on your next chapter here, and it's called Listen to Transcend Differences. And, I just kept thinking about the idea, and you've probably heard this before, right? That some people think to talk and some people talk to think.
Right.
And I think that's true, right? I mean, how many times have you maybe been in a meeting or a board meeting or just in a, some sort of conference or whatever? And I think there's some truth to that. But, at the same time, listening is an art, right? It takes practice. It takes being deliberate, and especially perhaps for those folks that talk to think. But I think this idea of listening, not just talking, but listening, and listening carefully and deliberately to transcend differences, is a very insightful idea. Can you share more about that with our listeners?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the one of the things that leaders know as they move up is that the higher they go in a organization, the more time they'll spend listening. When you're an individual contributor, you certainly listen a lot as well. But when you're a leader, everybody's coming to you all the time with their problems, their struggles. You're attending meetings constantly. You're always listening to people. Some of the leaders are known for their public speaking, but what you don't see behind the scenes is they're listening most of the day. So it is a leadership behavior, first and foremost, that anyone has to adjust to and get ready for. And then it depends on how well you do it. And in the book, we talk about the basics, which is, putting your phone away, uh, pushing away from your devices, really connecting, leaning into the conversation, literally and metaphorically. But then it also has to do with hearing the common humanity that you share. Listening deeply means understanding that there's common ground here. And that's one of the ways you can transcend those differences is we all want mostly the same things, right? Happy, healthy, meaningful lives. And we all oftentimes struggle with many of the same things. So listening for that deeper level is really the key. So we're not really talking about comprehensive listening, like where you're trying, like learning like a student, taking good notes from a teacher's lecture. We're talking about how you listen to what's beneath the surface when you're in leadership position. And then through that commonality, again, we get back to empathy, but also it equips you. Now you, as a leader, you have better information. You understand what's going on with people. And so when you make a decision, when you have to make a judgment call, it's going to be much more likely to hit the mark. So it's about connecting, it's about building relationships, but listening is a really effective tool for leaders who want to get it right.
Absolutely. So, Alex, do you have for any of our listeners, any employees in the workplace, like just a couple of good tactical items they can do to improve their listening skills?
Yeah, well, I mentioned a second ago, but one of the biggest things you can do is just commit to listening and get rid of anything in your way that might stop you, like your phone, like a screen.
Yeah.
Shut the door if there's someone's jackhammer out there, or close the window so the lawnmower doesn't bother, and really just focus, give the person your undivided attention. They say that Elvis, when he listened to people, he made you feel like you were the only person in the universe. I
Yeah.
would have loved to
Yeah.
experience that. But I think to
Yeah.
myself, if the king of rock and roll can make time for people and be undistracted, that is step one.
Yeah.
And once you position yourself to listen like that, then half the work is done. You just keep an open mind and hear what they have to say. Don't cut them off, really hear them out. Don't do that thing where people listen to respond. Just listen to understand. And that's going to get you pretty much a passing grade, if not better. Very few people even listen as well as we're describing here. I
Yeah.
would say maybe 10% listen that well. So you're going to be in an elite group if you just do the basics.
Yep. And again, don't you agree, Alex, that like any of your advice and recommendations in each one of these chapters, it takes intent, right? It takes thought and reflection. How do I
Yeah.
improve each of these behaviors?
Right.
You don't just read it in a book and think, oh, okay, well, yeah, that makes sense. But if you truly want to make a difference, you need to practice it. It's like anything.
Yeah, that's right.
Um, what about chapter 8, inspire unity and effect change?
Well, that's where we bring it all together and we say, okay, we've laid out the principles. Now let's take a long-term approach and put this into practice. And the easiest way, and we've been, doing talks on this and meeting with clients, and the easiest way that they seem to appreciate is where you say, just work on one behavior per day. So let's say Monday, you just work on greeting people really well. And
Hmm.
don't worry about the rest. Just work on greeting. Tuesday, ask more questions. Even if you ask 4 or 5 better questions on Tuesday, give yourself a check mark. On Wednesday, compliment, give a couple of specific pieces of feedback, and you just cycle through these one per day. Make it really easy. And in the book, that chapter is really about creating a communication plan that does exactly this. Just chart out a path to work on these and get some repetitions in so that they become, and just keep cycling through them until they each become second nature.
And that's really something I appreciate about, and that's exactly precisely what you do in your book, right? Is you take
Yeah.
these known research-based ideas and you make it very practical for your readers. So I appreciate that.